Listen carefully. Something unusual is happening in the world right now. Not quietly, not slowly, but all at once. Jobs are disappearing. Entire industries that once felt permanent are suddenly collapsing under the weight of automation, artificial intelligence, and economic shifts that few people fully understand. Workers who thought they had 30 more years in their careers are receiving emails that end their livelihoods in a single sentence. Oil prices are rising again, squeezing the global economy like a tightening fist. Markets are falling, investors are panicking, and governments are scrambling to stabilize systems that were never designed to withstand this level of pressure. But beneath the headlines, beneath the fear, beneath the chaos, there is a pattern that repeats throughout history, a pattern written long before the first stock market opened, long before the first oil well was drilled, long before the first algorithm replaced a human worker. The pattern is ancient, and if you understand it, everything happening today begins to make sense. Because moments like this have happened before. Not with smartphones, not with artificial intelligence, but with the same spiritual blueprint. You see, when systems begin to shake, when economies begin to collapse, when powerful institutions begin to fail, history shows that a new type of leadership begins to rise. Not the leaders the world expects, but the leaders God prepared in hidden places. Leaders forged through struggle. Leaders trained through rejection. Leaders who spent years in pits, prisons, deserts, and obscurity. And if you study the story carefully, one of the clearest examples is the story of Joseph. Joseph was not supposed to lead a nation. He was not supposed to control the food supply of the most powerful empire of his time. He was not supposed to stand before kings. Joseph began his journey in a pit, betrayed by his own brothers, thrown away like something worthless, sold into slavery. Imagine that moment. A young man who believed God had given him dreams, suddenly finding himself chained, abandoned, and dragged into a foreign land. Everything about Joseph's life looked like failure. But heaven saw something different, because Joseph's suffering was not punishment. It was preparation. You see, while Joseph thought his life was falling apart, God was positioning him for a moment that had not yet arrived. A moment when the entire global system would enter crisis. A moment when famine would spread across nations. A moment when kings would desperately search for someone who could interpret what was happening. And when that moment arrived, the man who once sat in a prison cell would suddenly stand in a palace. Because he had been prepared. Now pause for a moment and look at our world today. Millions of people are waking up to an economic reality they never expected. Corporations are replacing workers with artificial intelligence faster than governments can regulate it. Truck drivers are watching autonomous technology threaten their future. Writers are watching machines generate articles in seconds. Customer service departments are being replaced by automated systems. Entire industries are quietly shrinking. And while many people are panicking, others are beginning to notice something deeper. Because economic collapse does something unusual. It exposes who was truly prepared. When everything is stable, almost anyone can appear successful. When money flows easily, many systems look strong. But when pressure arrives, the truth begins to reveal itself. And right now the pressure is rising across the entire global economy. Oil prices are climbing because energy has always been the hidden heartbeat of global power. Every factory, every shipping route, every military operation, every digital server, everything runs on energy. When energy prices rise, the entire system begins to strain. Food prices increase, transportation becomes expensive, inflation spreads, markets react, investors panic, governments intervene. But there is another layer beneath this. Because while economies rise and fall, civilizations follow spiritual patterns. Look at ancient Egypt. Look at Babylon. Look at Rome. Look at every empire that once believed it would last forever. Each one eventually faced a moment when its stability cracked. And during those moments, something unexpected happened. Outsiders began to rise. People who were once ignored suddenly became essential. People who had been pushed to the margins suddenly carried solutions the powerful desperately needed. Joseph was one of those people, a Hebrew slave standing in the palace of Pharaoh, explaining a global economic crisis before it happened. 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine, a collapse that would affect multiple nations. Joseph didn't just interpret the dream, he designed the solution. Store grain during the years of abundance. Prepare during the good times, because when the famine comes, the world will come to Egypt for survival. And that is exactly what happened. Entire nations traveled to Egypt because one man understood the pattern. Now ask yourself a question. What if we are entering another moment like that? What if the disruptions we are seeing right now are not random? What if the disappearing jobs, the rising oil prices, the unstable markets, the technological revolution are all part of a larger shift? A shift where old systems weaken and new leadership begins to emerge. Because history shows something powerful. The people who survive economic transformation are rarely the people who were comfortable inside the old system. The people who survive are the ones who learned resilience, the ones who learned creativity, the ones who learned how to build even when resources were scarce, the ones who learned faith in seasons when nothing made sense. And if we speak honestly, there is a community on this planet that understands those lessons deeply. A community whose history has been filled with pits, prisons, deserts, and struggles. The African diaspora. For centuries, Black communities across the world have lived through economic uncertainty that others are only beginning to experience. Generations were forced to build businesses with limited access to capital. Forced to innovate when systems refused to support them. Forced to survive when opportunities were intentionally restricted. This history was painful, brutal, unfair, but it also created something powerful. Resilience, creativity, spiritual endurance, the ability to build from nothing. And now, as the world enters an era of disruption, many people are beginning to realize something shocking. The survival skills Black communities developed over centuries may be exactly what this new era requires. Think about it. When stable corporate jobs disappear, people must learn entrepreneurship. When institutions become unreliable, communities must learn cooperation. When systems collapse, people must learn how to create new ones. These are not new challenges for the African diaspora. These are historical realities that generations have already faced. So while some people are just beginning to experience instability, others have been navigating it for centuries. And that raises a profound question. What if the very struggles that seemed like disadvantages were actually preparation? What if the pit was preparing Joseph for the palace? Because Joseph's story contains a lesson many people overlook. The pit did not disqualify him. The prison did not destroy him. Those seasons trained him. They sharpened his wisdom. They deepened his faith. They prepared him for a moment when millions of lives would depend on his leadership. Now look again at our current world. Artificial intelligence is transforming work faster than education systems can adapt. Companies are restructuring entire departments. Economic inequality is widening. Global tensions are rising. Supply chains are fragile, and every major institution seems to feel the pressure. These are not small changes. These are civilizational shifts. Moments like this only appear a few times in a century. And when they appear, they reshape everything. New industries rise. Old industries collapse. New leaders emerge. Old power structures weaken. And those who understand the moment step into influence. Joseph stepped into influence because he understood the season. He recognized the meaning behind the crisis. He saw opportunity where others saw fear. And the same question now stands before you. What season are we entering? Because the disappearance of jobs is not simply an employment problem. It is a signal that the economic model of the last 50 years is changing. For decades, society trained people to exchange time for wages. go to school, get a job, work for a corporation, retire after 40 years. But automation is rewriting that contract. Machines do not require salaries. Algorithms do not need healthcare. Artificial intelligence can work 24 hours a day without fatigue. This means the definition of value is changing. Human creativity, human leadership, human vision. These qualities are becoming more important than routine labor. And the people who thrive in this new era will not be the people who depended entirely on predictable systems. They will be the people who learned adaptability. People who know how to create value in uncertain environments. People who know how to lead communities rather than simply follow instructions. In other words, Joseph's. Leaders trained in adversity. Leaders who can see patterns others miss. Leaders who recognize that economic disruption often creates new doors of influence, but stepping through those doors requires something powerful. Identity. Joseph never forgot who he was. Even inside Pharaoh's palace, he remembered his spiritual foundation. He remembered the God who gave him dreams. He remembered the purpose that existed long before the pit. And identity matters now more than ever. Because when systems shake, people search for direction. They search for voices that carry clarity, voices that carry conviction, voices that carry spiritual authority. The world is entering a moment when leadership will not simply come from political titles or corporate positions. Leadership will come from people who understand purpose, people who understand history, people who understand the spiritual dimension behind global events. And many of those leaders will emerge from places the world once ignored, just like Joseph, a prisoner who became a governor, a slave who became an architect of national survival, a dreamer who became a strategist for an empire. The question is not whether disruption will come. The disruption is already here. The real question is who was prepared for it. Because somewhere right now, there are people watching this global shift with fear. But somewhere else, there are people recognizing the opportunity hidden inside the chaos. People who understand that God often moves during moments when systems collapse. Moments when power transitions. Moments when the unexpected becomes possible. And if you are watching closely, you may realize something about your own life. Maybe the struggles you experienced were not random. Maybe the seasons of rejection were not meaningless. Maybe the obstacles that slowed your progress were actually training. Training for a moment when your insight becomes valuable. Training for a moment when your leadership becomes necessary. Training for a moment when the world begins searching for answers. And you already understand the pattern. Joseph understood the pattern. Because he understood it, he stepped into influence exactly when the crisis arrived. Now the world is approaching another turning point. The systems are shaking. The markets are trembling. The technologies are accelerating. And the question echoing across history once again is simple. Who was prepared for this moment? Because somewhere, Joseph is waking up, and the palace doors are beginning to open. Something happens to people when systems begin to fail. At first, most don't notice it. The news calls it volatility. Economists call it correction. Politicians call it temporary instability. But history calls it something else. Transition. A shift from one era to another. And every transition follows the same pattern. The old guard tries desperately to preserve the system that made them powerful, while a new generation quietly prepares to build something different. Right now, we are living inside one of those transitions. You can see it in the labor market. For decades, millions of people believed the promise that if they worked hard, stayed loyal to their employers, and followed the traditional path, they would eventually reach stability. But that promise is quietly dissolving. Major corporations are restructuring entire departments, not because workers suddenly became less valuable, but because technology is rewriting the rules of productivity. Artificial intelligence now analyzes legal documents in seconds. Software can generate marketing campaigns faster than entire teams once could. Automated systems can answer customer questions, write reports, track shipments, diagnose equipment failures, and even assist in medical analysis. What used to require hundreds of employees can now be handled by a handful of engineers and a network of algorithms. The world is not simply evolving, it is accelerating. And acceleration creates pressure. You see it in the oil markets. Energy has always been the hidden engine of civilization. Every major economy depends on it. Factories depend on it. Transportation depends on it. Agriculture depends on it. Even the digital world, those massive data centers running artificial intelligence, consume staggering amounts of electricity. When energy prices rise, the entire global structure feels it. The cost of moving food increases. The cost of producing goods increases. The cost of maintaining infrastructure increases. Inflation spreads quietly across nations like a slow, moving storm. And as these pressures rise, financial markets begin to shake. Investors react quickly. Confidence fluctuates. Currencies shift. Entire industries feel the ripple effects. But behind these movements is something deeper than economics. Because economic cycles have always mirrored spiritual patterns. Scripture has described these cycles for thousands of years. In the book of Ecclesiastes, there is a passage that echoes through history. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to build, a time to tear down. Civilizations follow these seasons just like individuals do. There are seasons of growth, when opportunity seems endless and prosperity flows easily. And there are seasons of testing, when systems weaken and the true strength of a society is revealed. Right now, the global system is entering a testing season, and testing seasons reveal character. They reveal wisdom. They reveal leadership. Look again at Joseph's story. Joseph did not rise to power during a time of stability. He rose during a crisis. Pharaoh did not summon Joseph because everything was working perfectly. Pharaoh summoned Joseph because the entire empire was facing a future it could not understand. Dreams disturbed the king. The advisors were confused. The experts were silent. And suddenly, the man who had been forgotten in prison became the most important voice in the room. Why? Because Joseph had something the others did not. He had interpretation. He could see meaning where others saw chaos. He could recognize patterns where others saw confusion. And more importantly, he had a solution. Joseph didn't just explain the famine. He prepared for it. Store grain. Build reserves. Plan for scarcity before scarcity arrives. This was not only spiritual wisdom, it was economic strategy. And that is where Joseph's story begins, to mirror the moment we are living in now. Because the world today is experiencing warning signs that many leaders still refuse to interpret. Debt levels across nations are rising to historic levels. Supply chains are fragile. Energy competition between global powers is intensifying. Artificial intelligence is transforming the labor market faster than policymakers can react. These pressures are not isolated. They are connected. Just like the 7 years of abundance in Joseph's time eventually gave way to the 7 years of famine. Our world has been living through decades of expansion that may now be approaching a turning point. But here is the critical part most people miss. Joseph was prepared before the crisis arrived. Preparation is what transformed him from a prisoner into a governor. Preparation is what allowed him to step into leadership when others panicked. And preparation rarely happens during comfortable seasons. It happens in hidden seasons. Joseph's preparation happened in prison. Think about that. In the eyes of the world, prison was the lowest point of his life. But in the eyes of heaven, prison was leadership training. There, Joseph learned patience. He learned humility. He learned how to manage responsibility, even when no one was watching. He interpreted dreams for fellow prisoners long before he interpreted dreams for Pharaoh. God was sharpening his ability in a place nobody celebrated, and this pattern appears again and again throughout Scripture. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before leading a nation out of slavery. David spent years hiding in caves before becoming king. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before beginning his public ministry. Preparation often looks like delay, but delay is not always denial. Sometimes delay is development. Now consider the history of the African diaspora. For centuries, black communities have endured experiences that required extraordinary resilience. Enslavement, segregation, economic exclusion, generational inequality. These were not small hardships. They were deep wounds in human history. But even within those struggles, something powerful emerged. Faith traditions that carried communities through suffering. Cultural creativity that reshaped music, art, and language across the world. Entrepreneurial spirit that built businesses in environments where resources were scarce. Community networks that supported families when institutions failed them. These survival systems were not developed in comfort. They were developed under pressure, and pressure creates strength. This does not erase the injustice, but it reveals something important about preparation. The skills required to survive unstable systems have been cultivated within the African diaspora for generations. Now look again at the modern world. The corporate ladder is becoming less stable. Traditional career paths are dissolving. Automation is removing predictable roles, and suddenly millions of people are being forced to learn something new. How to adapt, how to innovate, how to create opportunity where none previously existed. But these are not new lessons for communities that have already spent generations doing exactly that, which raises an uncomfortable question for the global system. What happens when the very people who were once pushed to the margins become the most prepared for the new era? History has seen this before. In times of transition, leadership often emerges from unexpected places, because those who were comfortable inside the old system often struggle to function when that system collapses. But those who learned resilience outside the system, they know how to build without it. Joseph did not need the palace to develop wisdom. He developed wisdom in captivity. So when the palace needed wisdom, he was ready. And readiness is everything in moments like this. Right now, artificial intelligence is rewriting the definition of work. Algorithms are beginning to outperform humans in tasks that once required advanced education. Law firms are experimenting with AI research assistants. Financial firms are using machine learning to analyze market trends. Media companies are using automated writing tools. Customer service operations are increasingly handled by digital agents. This transformation is happening faster than most people expected, and with it comes fear. Fear of replacement. Fear of irrelevance, fear of economic instability. But every technological revolution creates two outcomes at the same time. It removes certain opportunities, and it creates new ones. The printing press disrupted scribes but created publishing. The Industrial Revolution displaced artisans, but created factories. The internet destroyed some industries, but created entire digital economies. Artificial intelligence will follow the same pattern. It will remove roles built on repetition, but it will elevate roles built on creativity, leadership, strategy, and vision. Human beings will always be needed to guide systems, to interpret meaning, to provide moral direction, to inspire communities. Machines can process information, but they cannot replace spiritual leadership. They cannot replace purpose. They cannot replace identity. And identity is where this moment becomes deeply personal. Because when the world shifts, people begin searching for who they truly are. They ask questions they ignored during comfortable seasons. What is my purpose? What was I actually created to do? What gifts do I carry that no machine can replicate? Joseph asked those questions in prison. He had dreams that made no sense at the time, dreams of leadership, dreams of influence, dreams that seemed impossible while he sat in chains. But those dreams were not illusions. They were previews. And sometimes God places previews inside people long before the world is ready to see them. The world wasn't ready for Joseph's leadership when he was 17 years old. But the famine was coming. And when the famine arrived, the palace needed the man who once sat in the pit. Look at our world again. Economic storms are forming. Technological revolutions are accelerating. Global power dynamics are shifting. And somewhere within these changes, a new generation of leaders is being prepared. Leaders who understand both struggle and vision. Leaders who carry spiritual awareness alongside practical wisdom. Leaders who can navigate complexity without losing purpose. These leaders will not all come from traditional institutions. Some will come from overlooked neighborhoods. Some will come from families that never had wealth. Some will come from communities that history underestimated. But preparation does not require privilege. Joseph proved that. Preparation requires faith, discipline, and the courage to develop your gifts even when no one is applauding. And right now, somewhere across the world, people are quietly developing those gifts, learning new skills, building businesses, strengthening their spiritual foundations, studying history, studying economics, studying technology. Not because everything is comfortable, but because they sense something changing. They sense that the season is shifting. And when seasons shift, those who prepared during the quiet years step forward. The palace begins searching for answers. The world begins searching for wisdom. And suddenly the voice that once went unnoticed becomes impossible to ignore. Joseph's voice once echoed inside a prison cell. Later, it echoed inside a royal court. Because destiny does not erase preparation. Destiny reveals it. And if the world is truly entering a moment of global transformation, then somewhere right now, another Joseph is preparing. There is a moment in every great transition when the world begins to realize that the systems it trusted are no longer as strong as they once appeared. At first, people try to deny it. They say the markets will bounce back. They say the jobs will return. They say the technology will stabilize. They say the institutions will fix everything. But history whispers a different truth. Every civilization reaches a moment when its old structures can no longer carry the weight of a new era. The Roman Empire reached that moment. The great financial powers of past centuries reached that moment. Even the kingdoms described in ancient scripture reached that moment, because time has a way of exposing what was only temporary. And right now, across the world, millions of people are beginning to sense that we are standing at one of those historical crossroads. The signs are everywhere. Entire industries are being rewritten by automation. Artificial intelligence is beginning to perform tasks that once required years of education. Energy markets are shifting as nations compete for resources that power their economies. Global supply chains are more fragile than they appeared during years of expansion. Debt levels across governments and corporations have climbed to heights that would have been unimaginable decades ago. And yet, most people are still trying to live as if nothing fundamental is changing. But the ground is already moving. The question is not whether change is coming. The question is who will understand it in time. Because understanding the moment is what separates those who survive disruption from those who are overwhelmed by it. Joseph understood his moment. When Pharaoh's advisors stood silent, Joseph spoke with clarity. When the empire faced uncertainty, Joseph saw a pattern. 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine, a cycle hidden inside a dream. That dream was not just symbolic, it was economic intelligence. It was strategic foresight. Joseph understood that prosperity often carries the seeds of future crisis. During the years when grain was plentiful, most people celebrated. They consumed. They expanded. They assumed the good times would last forever. But Joseph saw beyond the celebration. He saw the coming famine. So he built storage systems. He organized distribution networks. He prepared Egypt to become the center of survival for entire regions of the world. And when the famine arrived, nations traveled to Egypt not only for food, but for stability. Now pause and consider something remarkable. Joseph was not Egyptian. He was an outsider, a foreigner, someone who had been enslaved in that very land. Yet, during the greatest economic crisis of that era, the survival of Egypt depended on his wisdom. History repeats patterns like this more often than we realize. Outsiders frequently become leaders during times of transformation. Why? Because outsiders see what insiders cannot. People who grow up inside stable systems often assume those systems will last forever. But people who have lived through instability understand how fragile systems truly are. They learn to watch carefully. They learn to read patterns. They learn to prepare. This is one reason the African diaspora carries such a unique perspective in the modern world. For centuries, Black communities across continents have lived with economic uncertainty that others are only beginning to experience. Opportunities were limited. Institutions were unreliable. Systems often worked against them rather than supporting them. And yet, despite these obstacles, entire cultures flourished. Music reshaped global culture. Entrepreneurship built businesses from almost nothing. Communities formed support networks when official structures refused to help. Faith traditions sustained hope when circumstances looked impossible. This resilience was not developed during easy seasons. It was forged during storms. And storms have a strange way of preparing people for future battles. Now the global system itself is entering a storm. Artificial intelligence is transforming the workforce faster than most education systems can adapt. Millions of workers are discovering that roles they once believed were secure are suddenly vulnerable. Truck drivers are watching autonomous transportation technology evolve. Retail workers are seeing automated checkout systems replace traditional positions. Office workers are realizing that algorithms can complete tasks that once filled entire departments. Even creative professions are feeling the pressure of generative technology. And when people begin to feel their economic security slipping away, something powerful happens. They begin to question the system itself. They begin to ask deeper questions. Who controls the economy? Who benefits from these changes? What does the future of work actually look like? But beneath those economic questions lies an even deeper one. What is my purpose in a world that is changing this fast? Purpose becomes critical during times of disruption. Without purpose, chaos becomes overwhelming. But with purpose, chaos can become opportunity. Joseph's purpose carried him through betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment. He did not know exactly how his story would unfold, but he held on to the belief that God was shaping his path, and that belief gave him endurance. The Bible captures this idea beautifully in Romans 8:20-80. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. Notice what that verse does not say. It does not say all things feel good. It does not say all things are fair. It does not say all things are easy. It says all things work together. Even the painful moments, even the confusing seasons, even the delays that seem unbearable at the time. Joseph's life was filled with those moments. Imagine sitting in a prison cell for years after doing the right thing. Imagine interpreting dreams for people who promised to remember you, only to forget you once they were free. Imagine wondering if your life would ever make sense again. Joseph lived through that silence. But the silence did not last forever. One day, Pharaoh had a dream that none of his advisors could interpret. And suddenly the memory of Joseph resurfaced. In a single moment, the man who had been forgotten became essential. This is how destiny often works. Years of quiet preparation, followed by a sudden moment of recognition. People sometimes call it luck. But it is rarely luck. It is preparation meeting opportunity. And right now, the world is quietly creating new opportunities through disruption. When industries collapse, new industries rise. When old systems weaken, new systems begin forming. The digital economy did not exist 50 years ago, yet today it powers global communication, commerce, and creativity. Artificial intelligence will likely create new forms of work that we cannot fully imagine yet. But those opportunities will favor people who can think strategically, lead communities, and adapt quickly. The era of simply following instructions is fading. The era of creative leadership is emerging. And leadership always requires identity. Joseph never lost his identity even while serving inside Pharaoh's government. He knew where his wisdom came from. When Pharaoh asked him to interpret the dream, Joseph said something powerful. "It is not in me God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace." Joseph understood that his gift was not self-generated. It was divinely inspired. That humility gave him clarity. It kept him grounded even when he gained immense power. Because power without humility can destroy people. History is filled with leaders who rose quickly and collapsed just as quickly because they lost their moral foundation. But Joseph governed wisely because he remembered his purpose. And that kind of leadership may be exactly what the world needs in the coming years. Because technological power is growing faster than moral wisdom. Artificial intelligence is becoming more capable every year. But technology does not come with built-in ethics. It reflects the values of the people who control it. That means the future will depend heavily on the character of those who guide these systems. Will they use technology to empower communities? Or will they use it to concentrate power even further? Will economic systems become more inclusive? Or will inequality widen even more dramatically? These questions are not only technological, they are spiritual. They are questions about values, responsibility, and leadership. And leadership often emerges from places the world once overlooked. Remember David, a shepherd boy ignored by his own family when the prophet Samuel came searching for Israel's next king. Remember Esther, an orphan who became queen and saved her people during a moment of political crisis. Remember Moses, a man raised between two cultures who eventually led an entire nation out of bondage. Scripture repeatedly tells the story of unexpected leaders rising during moments of upheaval. Not because they sought power, but because they were prepared for responsibility. Preparation is happening right now, in places the world rarely pays attention to. In neighborhoods where people are learning how to build businesses with limited resources. In communities where families teach resilience and faith despite economic pressure. In young minds studying technology, economics, and scripture at the same time, searching for deeper understanding. Some of these individuals will become entrepreneurs. Some will become innovators. Some will become spiritual leaders, guiding communities through uncertain times. And some will become the Josephs of this generation, interpreters of the moment. People who can look at the chaos of global events and see patterns that others miss. People who can offer solutions when powerful institutions are confused. People who understand that the collapse of one system often signals the birth of another. Right now the world is standing on the edge of transformation. Energy markets are shifting. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries. Geopolitical tensions are redrawing alliances. And millions of people are asking the same question Pharaoh asked thousands of years ago. Who can help us understand what is happening? Who has the wisdom to guide us through this moment? When Pharaoh asked that question, the answer came from a prison cell. Today, the answer may come from places the world has long underestimated, because preparation rarely happens in the spotlight. It happens quietly. In study, in prayer, in discipline, in the determination to develop gifts even when no one is watching. Joseph developed his gifts in obscurity, but obscurity did not last forever. The palace doors eventually opened, and when they did, the world discovered that the man they once ignored was the man they needed most. The same possibility exists today. Somewhere, leaders are being prepared for the challenges of this generation. Somewhere, people who understand both struggle and faith are gaining the knowledge needed to guide communities through economic transformation. Somewhere, another Joseph is studying the patterns of history and recognizing that the moment of transition is already unfolding. And when the world begins searching for answers, their voices will rise. There comes a moment in every generation when the noise of the world becomes so loud that only those who can hear deeper truth remain steady. Right now, the noise is everywhere. Markets flashing red, headlines predicting recession, corporations announcing layoffs, energy prices climbing, artificial intelligence rewriting the rules of entire professions. For many people, it feels like the ground beneath their feet is slowly disappearing. The job they studied for no longer guarantees security. The degree they worked years to obtain no longer promises opportunity. The economic ladder that once seemed predictable now looks unstable. And when people feel that instability, fear spreads quickly. Fear of the future. Fear of being left behind. Fear that everything they worked for may not survive the coming changes. But fear has always appeared at the doorway of transformation. Every major shift in human history has carried the same emotional storm. When the Industrial Revolution began, people feared machines would destroy their livelihoods. When electricity spread across cities, people feared technology was moving too fast. When the internet emerged, many believed it would destabilize society. And in some ways, every one of those fears contained truth. Because transformation always disrupts what came before. But disruption is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of something new. Joseph understood that principle thousands of years ago. When Pharaoh shared the troubling dream, Egypt was still standing strong. The Nile still flowed. The fields still produced grain. The empire still appeared powerful. But Joseph knew something others could not see. The season was changing. 7 years of abundance would be followed by 7 years of famine. So severe that the prosperity people once celebrated would be forgotten. Imagine standing in that palace. Imagine telling the most powerful ruler of the region that a crisis was coming, which could threaten the entire economic structure of his empire. That kind of message requires courage. But Joseph did more than warn Pharaoh. He offered a path forward. Store grain. Prepare. Strengthen the system before the storm arrives. And Pharaoh recognized something remarkable in Joseph. He saw wisdom that transcended politics. He saw clarity that transcended fear. Scripture records Pharaoh saying something profound. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? With that recognition, Joseph stepped into authority. Not because he demanded it, not because he inherited it, but because the moment required the exact wisdom he had spent years developing in obscurity. And this is where Joseph's story begins to mirror the world we are entering now, because the modern global system is facing pressures that many leaders are only beginning to acknowledge. Artificial intelligence is not just a new tool. It is a force capable of restructuring entire industries. When machines can analyze data faster than human analysts, entire job categories change. When algorithms can write code, produce marketing copy, and assist in research, the meaning of productivity shifts dramatically. Some corporations are embracing this transformation with excitement. Others are approaching it cautiously. But the direction is clear. The labor market of the future will not look like the labor market of the past. At the same time, the global energy system is undergoing its own transformation. Oil prices rise and fall with geopolitical tension, supply disruptions, and strategic decisions made by powerful nations. Energy remains the foundation beneath every modern economy. Transportation networks depend on it. Manufacturing depends on it. Agriculture depends on it. Even the digital economy, with its enormous data centers and computing infrastructure, requires immense energy to function. When energy becomes expensive, the ripple effects spread across every sector. Food prices rise, shipping costs increase. Inflation spreads quietly through everyday life, and financial markets react quickly to those pressures. Investors move capital, governments adjust policy, corporations restructure operations. All of these shifts create uncertainty, but uncertainty also creates openings. Joseph recognized that the coming famine would shift power across the region. Nations that failed to prepare would struggle, but the nation that stored resources wisely would become a center of stability. Egypt became that center. People traveled from distant lands seeking food. Trade routes shifted. Influence followed preparation. Now imagine applying that principle to the modern world. The communities and leaders who prepare wisely during this period of transformation will shape the future economy. Preparation today may look like learning new technological skills. It may look like building businesses rather than relying solely on employment. It may look like strengthening community networks that support families during uncertain times. It may look like studying economics, history, and scripture together to understand deeper patterns. But preparation also requires something less visible. It requires faith. Faith that difficult seasons are not meaningless. Faith that the struggles of the past may actually hold lessons for the future. Faith that identity and purpose matter more than temporary systems. The African diaspora carries a history that reflects that kind of endurance. Generations faced systems that restricted opportunity. Yet within those challenges emerged remarkable creativity, faith traditions, cultural influence, and entrepreneurial spirit. Music that transformed global culture. Movements that reshaped civil rights. Communities that built schools, businesses, and institutions despite enormous barriers. These achievements did not emerge from comfort. They emerged from perseverance. And perseverance is one of the most valuable qualities during times of transformation. Because transformation rarely moves smoothly. It moves through tension, through trial and error, through moments when the future feels unclear. Joseph lived inside that uncertainty for years. When he sat in prison, he could not see the palace ahead. When he interpreted the dreams of fellow prisoners, he did not know those moments were training for the day he would stand before Pharaoh. But every experience sharpened his ability. Every challenge strengthened his character. And when the defining moment arrived, Joseph was ready. That pattern still exists today. Some people are currently living in what feels like a pit. Financial pressure, career uncertainty, dreams that seem delayed, opportunities that never arrived when expected. But what if those seasons are not wasted? What if they are preparation? Preparation for leadership that has not yet been revealed. Preparation for influence that only becomes possible when the world enters crisis. The Bible contains a verse that captures this idea beautifully. In Isaiah 60:1 it says, "Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee." The verse continues by describing a world covered in darkness, while light rises upon a prepared people. Throughout history, spiritual awakenings have often occurred during periods of global instability. When systems fail, people begin searching for deeper truth. They begin asking questions about purpose, justice, and faith. And leaders who carry both wisdom and humility become incredibly valuable during those moments. But those leaders must first understand who they are. Identity shapes leadership. Joseph never forgot his identity, even while serving in Pharaoh's government. He remained connected to the faith that sustained him through adversity. That connection kept his leadership grounded, because leadership without spiritual grounding can become dangerous. Technology without ethics can become destructive. Economic power without compassion can deepen inequality. The future will require leaders who balance innovation with moral responsibility. Leaders who understand both technology and humanity. Leaders who remember that prosperity should strengthen communities rather than exploit them. And many of those leaders will come from backgrounds that taught them resilience long before they held positions of influence. Joseph's journey from the pit to the palace is not just an ancient story. It is a blueprint. A reminder that preparation often happens in hidden places. A reminder that purpose can survive betrayal and delay. A reminder that when the world enters crisis, the people who learned wisdom through adversity become essential. Right now, the world is shifting in ways that few fully understand. Artificial intelligence will reshape the workforce. Energy transitions will reshape global power dynamics. Economic systems will continue to evolve under pressure from debt, inflation, and technological acceleration. These changes will create challenges, but they will also create opportunities for new leadership. Opportunities for people who can think differently. People who can build systems that are more resilient, more ethical, and more inclusive. And somewhere within the African diaspora, and within many communities that have known struggle, there are individuals being prepared for exactly that kind of leadership. Entrepreneurs developing ideas that challenge traditional industries. Technologists exploring how artificial intelligence can empower communities rather than replace them. Educators teaching new generations how to navigate both faith and innovation. Visionaries who understand that identity and purpose matter even in a digital age. The world may not notice them yet. Joseph was unnoticed for years, but obscurity is not the same as insignificance. Sometimes obscurity is incubation, a season where gifts develop without distraction, a season where character forms quietly, a season where purpose grows stronger. Then one day, the moment arrives. The dream that once seemed distant suddenly becomes relevant. The wisdom developed in private suddenly becomes public. The doors that once seemed permanently closed begin to open. Joseph experienced that moment when Pharaoh called for him. One day he was in prison. The next day he was standing before the most powerful leader of the region. History can change quickly when the right person meets the right moment, and right now the world is moving toward a moment like that again. Systems are shifting. Technologies are accelerating. Economies are adjusting. And people everywhere are asking the same question that echoed through Pharaoh's palace thousands of years ago. Who has the wisdom to guide us through this? The answer will not come only from traditional power structures. It will come from prepared minds, prepared hearts, prepared leaders who understand that their journey, every struggle, every delay, every unexpected turn, was shaping them for a purpose larger than themselves. Joseph's life proved that preparation can transform adversity into authority. The pit did not destroy him. The prison did not silence him. Those seasons refined him. And when the world needed his wisdom most, he was ready. Now the question returns to the present moment. As jobs disappear, as oil prices rise, as markets tremble, as technology reshapes the meaning of work, who is being prepared right now? Because somewhere in this generation, another Joseph is rising.